financial incentives and the explicit program support for passive house projects make high performance building economically more feasible, especially in the affordable housing space where budgets are tight.
Welcome to the Passive House Podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House Podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House Podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand, and we're joined this week by Zach Semke. How are you, Zach?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. And you're back from a trip to New Zealand?
Yes, I was in Middle Earth for 2 weeks. It was incredible. I was in the South
Nice.
Island, and it was absolutely stunning. And I'm very jealous of you to be able to live there in New Zealand.
It does have its positives,
Yeah.
and enjoying a pretty good summer down here at the moment. I've also got with us this week Mary. How are you doing, Mary?
I'm well. It was a great conversation we got to have, so that was great.
Looking forward to getting into this great interview that you've brought us along with Jay Fox. Great to have you back on the podcast again as well, Jay.
Great to be here. This is I believe, my last podcast in this space. I'm moving other side of the river to West Asheville in a week. So, I guess, yeah, I'm doing 2 different trips, but I should be set up there by end of next week.
Very exciting.
Will that be a change in climate for you, or the same winter?
Possibly a change in microclimate, because I'll be, maybe 200 feet lower than where I am now.
You're coming down from the hills.
Yeah, coming down from the hills. So, and again, on the other side of the river, it's a little different over there. So it should be nice.
Well, we joined this week, you were joined in a great conversation with Carmel Pratt, who will be a name that's familiar with many of our listeners. She's been heavily involved with not just the Passive House Accelerator, but Passive House in general, particularly around the New York area, but a very influential person, a bit of a leader, which she describes a little bit about the origin story of some of the things that she's been involved in and some of that great history of Passive House and where it's going. So really keen to get into that. But before we do, we've got a few people to thank, Zach.
Indeed. So a big thank you to Partel, who is our sponsor of the week this week and is making all of our programming here at Passive House Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast, possible this week. Thank you too to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And thanks to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050.
All right. Well, with that, let's jump straight into this great conversation with Carmel Pratt, who is now the Executive Director of New York Passive House.
Welcome to the Passive House Podcast. I'm Mary James, and I'm here with co-host Jay Fox. And we're very excited today to speak with the new Executive Director of New York Passive House, Carmel Pratt, who also has other roles in her life in addition to this. We'll get into that now. Carmel, can you tell us a little bit about how and when you got involved with New York Passive House and what else you do professionally?
Sure. And first, thank you so much for having me on to speak. I'm always eager to share, fast factual with a PH of what's going on for me personally and for the broader industry. So thanks for having me on. Yeah, very briefly, my background academically is in architecture, building systems, and sustainability. and professionally has been very aligned with that through sustainability consulting and energy engineering, specifically with certifications and those stepping stones towards Passive House through home energy ratings, LEED green ratings, then becoming a certified Passive House consultant, the FIAS verifier, and doing a lot of Passive House projects. But my first involvement with New York Passive House, specifically as an organization, was very boots on the ground in a volunteer role. Before I was even Passive House certified, before I had even worked on my own first project, I did the Icebox challenge with them. So I was really just out on the streets canvassing about the idea of Passive House in this volunteer role, getting it out to kind of the general public. And for myself, exciting myself about the possibility of Passive House and how it works in practice. And through that kind of volunteering, I volunteered with their conference and attended and just started learning more. And then eventually, after having actually worked on projects and gotten certified, I joined their board of directors in 2020. And that was a really pivotal time for the organization. New York Passive House was going through a strategic kind of redevelopment, realigning. And then I was humbled to have been approached for the executive director position at this perfectly divine timing when I started my own solo practice. So I went out on my own, and I'm now, taking on my own projects in this kind of sustainability consulting, energy consulting role, and now have that part-time capacity to step into the executive director role.
Very cool. I guess stepping back with just to go into the organization a little bit more, can you tell us a bit more about New York Passive House as an organization, their history?
Yes, I'd love to, because again, I'm humbled to be stepping into this position of such a rich and tenured history. So New York Passive House was incorporated in June of 2010. So, for the past 15 plus years, New York Passive House really evolved from a small kind of meeting of the minds, a gathering of Passive House enthusiasts in the New York space, with the founding directors being Andreas Benzing, who is the previous executive director, and Floris Keverling, who is the founder and leader of 475 Building Supply, along with Kevin Levinson, who was also previously with 475 and is now the executive director of PHN, of the Passive House Network nationally. So, these guys got together, and what I can only assume was, over a drink and some conversations, started this really powerful organization. So in that same year of 2010, in December, they were the first organizations after incorporating to join the International Passive House Association, so the IPHA, and really affiliated themselves with the Passive House International Standard and Movement and that certification research agency. In 2012, they held their first symposium, which was an all-day conference highlighting the first 40 plus Passive House projects across New York State, in a really kind of early pioneering time for Passive House. And then in August of 2018, they had a big policy achievement where their work with legislation and with politicians really came to light through their work with the Manhattan Borough President. They issued a resolution formally recognizing and supporting the Passive House standard as a critical framework for achieving New York City's climate, health, and housing objectives. So 2018 was like a pivotal kind of policy engagement year for the organization. And I'm just providing some highlights, but all throughout those years, there's been just a ton of engagement with practitioners, with projects in manufacturers, products, policy, and most heavily, I would say, in education, right, through programming, both in person and online. And then in 2022, so right after the pandemic and things kind of came back online, or actually I should say came back offline and in person. In 2022, the organization created new bylaws and a strategic development plan for transparency and for collaboration. And this was a time of really addressing head-on the history of Passive House Institute, international PHI and the national FIAS standard. And the organization decided to stay affiliated with PHI, continue that ongoing co-membership with the IPHA, but really decide to become agnostic in our offerings of education and supporting projects of both standards, and really partnering with both organizations across the table for the betterment of the industry, for furthering, all of our kind of collective direction and desires for Passive House movement. And then in 2023, a year later, New York Passive House joined the Cross Learning Alliance with the Urban Green Council. And that's a partnership of educational providers in the space, broadly in the building performance and building energy space. So, it's really been taking on a big educational role in that. And then most excitingly, I think in 2025, the organization adopted a new digital platform for membership management and engagement, for educational programming and tracking. And that platform is called Growth Zone. And through that, we've created an info hub for members. We've created CEU tracking and a way to really bring our community together in a more organized and easier fashion. And then, of course, there was rebranding with that. So a new logo, and finish out the year of 2025 with new leadership, both with myself stepping in and a new board slate. So it's a really exciting, pivotal time of many years of history and a lot of efforts from the founding members, directors, and community.
Wow. Well, that's, a quick look on such a rich history and organizational development. And, during that time, I just want to point out that New York has been this shining star of Passive House across the country. I mean, the number of projects of Passive House projects in New York State it's very impressive. And I just wonder if it probably will be hard to define this exactly, but what do you see as New York Passive House role today in the high performance building community, especially given that there is more acceptance and certainly understanding of what Passive House is in New York, probably than anywhere, maybe other than Massachusetts by now, but in the US?
Yeah, and it's a great question and very timely, especially in 2025 and really in this 2026 kind of year looking ahead. I think the role that New York Passive House as an organization plays is now expanding beyond Passive House, very importantly, and more broadly into the high performance kind of building space. And I think a lot of that is achieved through collaborative advocacy, policy initiatives. The same reasons why New York has so many Passive House projects is because of good legislation and programming awareness. So not only collaborative advocacy and policy, but also education and resources, and creating that kind of open source, engagement, knowledge sharing. It really has been New York's hub for Passive House design and construction professionals for so long. So the aim kind of looking forward is to broaden that adoption and awareness, and also deepen the technical knowledge, right? Because there's, always moving targets in terms of program updates, whether it's the Passive House standards or other certification programs or code, administrative updates on the, political kind of legislative side. And I think beyond just deepening that technical knowledge, really helping to exponentially support implementation, right? So really targeting industry support through manufacturer partnerships and other trades to be like a hub for trades and professionals. And I think excitingly, in my research, and I hope this is a correct statement, but our organization is the only Passive House focused 501c6 nonprofit, which is specifically trade organizations. So there are a few 501c3 nonprofit Passive House aligned organizations, but we've really set ourselves apart as a 501c6, specifically to support the trades that are working to implement Passive House.
That I did not know that designation existed for 501(c)(3) things.
Yeah, I am learning about it as well. But yeah, it's our little the Passive House movement loves the accolade of being the first or only of XYZ, right? The tallest Passive House and the only Passive House, textile factory. And so we are the only Passive House 501c6 organization in the nation.
Okay. I should note that people also like telling you that you're wrong when you write that something's the first of anything. As that
yes.
repeatedly over the 5 years of writing articles where people like to say like, oh, we're the first multifamily FIAS certified in Washington State. And then people will be like, actually, no, there was this other project that like they got design certified first, but we finished first. And you're like, ugh.
Right. Which is why I led with, according to my research. I could be wrong, but
good. I like that. You've learned. But I guess speaking, continuing the talk of like groups that, what kind of partner organizations have you worked with as, either like political organizations or someone like NYSERDA or like local groups to New York or even trade associations? Like who's been kind of like the critical partners for New York Passive House and who do you hope to kind of partner with in the future? I'm just realizing that there was the event Regenerative Metropolis at the New School last year. Do you think you'll be working with New School or other, educational institutions like that going forward?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, partnerships and collaborations are at the heart of how New York Passive House was created to begin with and how it continues to kind of grow and thrive and provide programming. And honestly, there are too many to list all of our partners and sponsors. And so I do encourage people to check out our website and see our listing of sponsors and member organizations. But to name a few key organizations, you've already mentioned one of them, NYSERDA, who is a big sponsor on the educational front. They've sponsored our annual symposium, Regenerative Metropolis, that you mentioned. And Parsons, the New School, is another key partner on that side. We are continuing to, annually provide this free event for students and for members or non-members, the public, to learn about all things building science and passive house adjacent through that regenerative metropolis symposium. And I already mentioned the International Passive House Association, that IPHA, which is our affiliate co-membership through HI. We also have partnered with Urban Green Council, as I mentioned, through that Cross-Learning Alliance and through other kind of key events and educational resources. We've partnered with NESE, the Northeast Sustainability and Energy Association, Building Energy Exchange here in New York City, AIA New York, because we do have a large portion of our membership on the architecture side of design. Passive House Network, of course, both because of historical ties and also alignment with, with our general desires to educate and credential the industry. And like I mentioned, we have a lot of incredible company sponsors that help fund and provide critical educational programming, amongst other kind of collaborative efforts that we do together.
Well, looking at the kind of policies that are in force in the city and in the state of New York, can you just, for people who aren't familiar with how that has boosted the proliferation of passive house in New York, can you just tell us, what are some of the key policies, and are there any policy changes on the horizon which will affect New York Passive House either positively or negatively? And of course, we have to include in there the new mayor of New York City. Pretty exciting change there.
Yeah. Yes. A round of air applause. I love this question. I selfishly think that we could spend an entire hour plus, maybe day, maybe week long conference on this topic, but I'll try to summarize as quickly as possible without speaking too quickly. In the recent past, there have been a lot of really strong, both local, city, and state level legislation passed, right? The city local laws like Local Law 97, which was passed in 2019 for carbon emission caps on buildings of a certain size, and Local Law 154 in 2021 for building electrification, essentially a fossil fuel ban on buildings of a certain size. These were incredible pieces of legislation that came through the City Climate Mobilization Act. And it came in parallel with the state level Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLCPA. In 2023, the building electrification policy that was adopted in 2021 through Local Law 154 in the city was also adopted statewide in 2023. So we're seeing this kind of, really great kind of copycat, copy and paste thing happening between city and state level and then across state lines, right? We know Massachusetts has been making sweeping changes, and we're seeing those things trickle because we have a great way of sharing information and a great healthy dose of competition, in terms of wanting to do the most and be the most XYZ sustainable, forward thinking, energy conserving. Right. So very recently, in the last 2 years, we also at the city level had a huge zoning reform through City of Yes. This was a sustainability zoning reform that covered so many aspects of sustainability, not just in buildings or housing, but had a big impact on how passive house as a method of, getting some of these benefits of the zoning reform, of being able to expand floor area ratios for just building more, getting more units per parcel of land. And then there's also the incentivization side, right? Like, so not just the sticks of this is required and policy and law, but also the carrots of funding and incentives. So at the city level, the Housing Preservation Department of New York City, that's NYCHPD, they have incentive programs and funding subsidies available at a higher level for projects that are pursuing passive house, like through their future housing initiative. And they've also worked passive house into their design guidelines. So they've incorporated passive house principles and heavily encouraged certification through their design guidelines. That's at the city level. Similarly, at the New York State level, there's the Homes Community Renewal, New York State HCR. And in the same fashion, they've incorporated passive house principles into their design guidelines, offered increased funding, subsidy, and incentives for certification. And this is especially important because the financial incentives and the explicit program support for passive house projects make high performance building economically more feasible, especially in the affordable housing space where budgets are tight. And then I could go on for days on this stuff. And this is, I think, a topic area that actually as an organization, we are targeting a couple-hour kind of conference and membership knowledge sharing meeting about the new energy code. So that's kind of the big hot topic in the state and at the city level right now, because the new energy conservation code is out and adopted at the state level. So the New York State Energy Code came into effect December 31st of 2025. So we are now in that new state code era. And in the city, the New York City Energy and Construction Conservation Code always follows suit, right? And typically also adopts at a more stringent level than the state. And because of that, it was actually, instead of coming into adoption at the same time, was pushed back just in the last week by DOB to be adopted by March 30th of 2026. So by March, the city will also have adopted that new energy code. And these are truly sweeping changes to the energy code from what is currently in effect. Again, we can do an entire podcast episode on this topic alone, but I do want to offer a short summary of kind of the stringency on the building performance side, because it is just a drastic jump over the previous code, talking in the scale of anywhere from 10 to 20% of an energy savings impact over the previous code, and a lot more covered buildings. So, that increased the actual requirement of how many buildings will have to be covered under these new requirements. For example, commissioning is now required on any building over 10,000 square feet, whereas before it was a much higher threshold to require commissioning. And that includes, enhanced verification of mechanical systems, of envelope, more stringent air tightness testing requirements that are very much more aligned with passive house. So this is really exciting in terms of the direction it's taking and the stringency that buildings will have to follow now. On the other side, and I, have my kind of passive house consultant and energy modeler hat on for this, but they added in requirements for energy modeling and requiring a building energy modeling professional kind of credential certification for people who are doing modeling. And that, comes with a code of ethics and with some additional just responsibility around modeling and credentialing around modeling to make sure that it's, at least much closer to reality than it tends to be. And then very excitingly, from the kind of materials and broader carbon emissions standpoint, there are new requirements to provide EPDs, environmental product declarations, and embodied carbon values for specific materials like CMU and concrete, and provide baselines for projects to understand kind of what is the target, like the starting target, and how can we do better. And it's not requiring any reductions to that baseline yet, but there are credits available. And it's kind of the step one of encouraging the information to get out there, encouraging tracking that information, and signals future policy, right, which will go towards the direction of carbon limits and carbon reductions on the embodied carbon side. There's also an increase in renewable energy requirements. So thinking about the broader grid outside of the building. And again, just to kind of pin the scale of this new code, is that the previous code was based on the commercial ASHRAE 90.1 2016 version. And this new code jumps versions. So between the 2016 ASHRAE 90.1 baseline that we had, there was also a 2019 version. And the new code, although it's called the 2025 Energy Code, it's actually loosely based on the commercial ASHRAE 90.1 2022 baseline with some additional stringencies. Because New York always adopts a slightly more stringent version of ASHRAE, it's accurate to say that the code is effectively more stringent than ASHRAE 90.1 2022. So we've jumped from 2016, skipped 2019, and adopted a version that's somewhere between the 2022 and 2025 ASHRAE versions. This is important because it really scales the impact of the energy savings over the current 2025 code compared to previous 2020 code. And this is all for the commercial portion. The residential code is adopted from the New York amended IECC 2024, whereas the commercial code is the New York amended ASHRAE 90.1 2022. But yeah, we're still figuring out the math, and obviously it is dependent on every building type, but we're seeing somewhere in the range of like 10 to 20% energy savings impact over the current code.
Wow. Very impressive.
And I'm just, does this affect commercial as well? You said everything above 10,000 square feet. Is that commercial and residential, or just residential?
Yes. Yeah, it's commercial and residential. So residential above that 10,000 square feet, is also applicable. Most multifamily residential buildings above a certain size are considered in the commercial side of the code. And it's really an exciting time. It is, I just want to acknowledge and address, also a stressful time for designers, for general contractors, for developers, as is any time with a big change. But it's also exciting and well-timed with a new administration at the city level, with great movement, on the policy side at the state level. And, for us internally as New York Passive House, with our state and local policy committee, we're actively working to continue to push out more resources to help with these changes, but also to push for a Passive House compliance option, pathway, because unfortunately, code is still not well aligned with the Passive House energy modeling software specifically. Mm-hmm. And, we've been exploring this for a long time, exploring that kind of like outcome-based energy, like performance-based energy code that's better aligned with our packaging of modeling and how we approach the Passive House standard. Because right now, the energy and zoning codes, unfortunately, are restricted due to the New York State Department of State Division of Building Standards and Codes. That is the specific department that requires DOE developed tools to show code compliance. So that's like ComCheck and ResCheck, or a DOE2 based energy modeling software. That is still the narrow lens of compliance for energy code. And so that is still an ongoing effort to try to align and not have to essentially do two separate energy models, one to show code compliance and one to show Passive House compliance.
And do you think that would you have better luck just, or I guess, would the city even be able to adopt that kind of policy on its own, or would it have to be both the city and the state, because the state supersedes the city and it's kind of a garbled
Exactly.
mess? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, you're spot on with that. Yeah, it has to be at the state level and kind of trickle down.
Okay. That's always tough because, yeah, the state tends to move a little slower than the city sometimes on these things.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess this is very kind of forward focused and future focused, but just going back a little bit for the organization New York Passive House, like what have been some of the accomplishments that you've, like recently kind of some feathers in your cap that you're hoping to build on and kind of build momentum to hopefully get some more policy changes enacted?
Yeah, well, I think Mary already mentioned it nicely, which was just the adoption, right, at large scale across the city and state of passive house buildings, fully certified buildings. And that just helps build the database, build the, that weight to kind of show proof of concept. I think the other major accomplishment is the education of professionals, right, through credentialing, but also through actual project knowledge sharing, postmortem and and pre-development, really educating folks and connecting them. And then I think on the policy work side, right, that resolution in 2018 with the Manhattan Borough President's Office, and recently supporting a lot of those sweeping local laws and state level laws that are heading us towards that aligned direction of passive house. We've been heavily involved in those through both like in person, at hearings and authoring letters and getting co-signatures and all that. And I think just generally looking at the history and the tenure and the growth, throughout the 15 plus years, I think it's a great accomplishment that we've both kept our deep local roots to New York City, while also widening and broadening to the state level and even to a global level, right? That's kind of our new, along with our rebranding, we have this new focus of, a global impact. How can we continue that scale of awareness and adoption beyond the city and state level?
That makes sense, because I just remember when Local Law 97 got passed and how a lot of people from not even the United States, but Canada and Europe, and maybe not Europe as much, but other places were like, wow, this is a really phenomenal piece of legislation, and it's New York City, so it's, you're kind of front and center on the world stage.
Yeah.
So very
sure.
Cool. So given that amazing history and all the accomplishments, you've mentioned several themes that you guys, as an organization, New York Passive House wants to pursue, but I wonder if we can sort of drill down a little bit into more specific goals for 2026 for the New York Passive House.
Yeah. Again, it's a exciting and, kind of pivotal time, both from a people perspective of how our team is made up, and also from a like technologically enabled perspective of the actual tool and platform that we have now. And we sat down and discussed a theme and a focus area of enablement, both through workforce development, more, trades training, focus on kind of hands-on the constructability side of passive house, and from an economic focus, right? Making projects pencil, helping to demystify, but also actually, provide data and tools for helping on the economic side. And I think this has widespread impact across both retrofit and new construction development. I think that's also a focus, is to continue to support, both our existing building stock as well as our new building stock. And, I mentioned the energy codes, but that's going to be a major focus of this year, is helping the industry adjust to those new codes, the new administration. So our like I mentioned, our membership meeting in March will be heavily focused on that new code, that the administration, and connecting our members and our partners in talking through these things that I mentioned, right? The economics, talking through workforce and the struggles right now with the workforce of skilled trade, and trying to partner a lot more with hands-on training providers through unions and through other partnerships that really take this beyond a design professional's kind of focus and bring in that boots on the ground.
Do you have a date for that member meeting in March that you mentioned?
Yes, it is March 4th. Let me pull up the information so that I get it correct. The location is still TBD, but we are doing a in-person hybrid approach so that we can get people together, but no one misses it because of the location. So it's on March 4th, and it should be in the late evening, probably somewhere in downtown Manhattan.
Great.
I might actually be there. Well, in New York.
Awesome. Well, I hope to see you in person.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Even if maybe I should be a member just because I have such ties to New York still. So that would make sense.
And it's exciting because we haven't had an in-person member meeting in many, many years now, pre-pandemic. We've had our symposium and other educational and, fun networking things, but this is going to be a nice combination of like education, networking, sharing, and, some fun too.
Nice. Well, any other events kind of coming up within the next, either virtual or in person within the next couple months, or I don't know, anything that big educational initiatives planned?
Yeah, so we have the annual general member meeting March 4th. This month in January, we have 2 webinars planned. We do have 1 to 2 webinars every month. So that's kind of our ongoing rolling online education. We have our annual Regenerative Metropolis Symposium at the New School of Parsons that is set for the fall of 2026. We are working on expanded networking events with our partners, again, trying to bring in a lot more kind of in-person opportunities to connect. And additionally, because we have this online platform now through Growth Zone and the Info Hub, we're putting together more on-demand courses, credentialing courses and other trainings that people can access when is convenient for them. And then, like I mentioned, partnering with more training providers and organizations through that Cross-Learning Alliance, through unions. So providing some more in-person trainings and again, with the real hope of targeting trades, skilled trades and unskilled trades from the construction side.
Yes. Yeah, I love that because I think that's one of, speaking from the accelerator's kind of point of view, we've struggled sometimes to attract tradesfolk and developers as well. So do you have any plans to kind of, I don't know, cater to developers and kind of walk them through how to adopt Passive House into their buildings?
Yeah, I think that was a big goal of, I mean, mine always. Like, generally, I think getting developers and builders on board with any sort of green building movement is essential on the making it constructible and making it economically feasible focused side of things. But excitingly, we added a new board member this year from Riseborough, Josh Sheffer, who is their energy manager. And so Riseborough has always been kind of a pioneer, early adopter, developer of affordable passive houses. So having someone like that on the board from a developer's perspective is a great addition. And partnering, I think, with developers and with the unions and trades training providers out there is going to be kind of the big that big shift this year. And nothing in the works yet in any concrete way, but we're even talking about what would it look like to have an annual symposium like we do with Parsons at a trade school, right?
Yeah.
Like targeting kind of early people in their career of trades and opening that Passive House for All kind of approach that Incho takes to educating folks at a younger level or just outside the bubble of of our very aware industry.
That's really exciting. And because one of the things that I don't think New York City has, unless I'm missing it, is an actual physical place to do Passive House trades training in. Does it?
There's a few places. There isn't one central hub, and there are a few places. So, for example, Emu Passive, right? Our friend Enrico from Colorado has done a lot of certified passive house trades builder trainings in Brooklyn. And it's, been hosted, I think, maybe once at Force and 5, once at the Navy Yards, and in different places. There hasn't been a central location for it, but it has been a consistent, offering every few years or so. The Association for Energy Affordability, AEA, is also, a somewhat of a hub, not always specifically to Passive House, but it has this kind of space for training and hands-on. And there's other either product factories like manufacturers that sometimes host hands-on events, and other partners through the Cross Learning Alliance from Urban Green Council, and I'm blanking on the name of the training organization, but it's a union, it's a mix of different union, carpenters and electricians and building facility managers that have some in-person on-site trainings. But that's an interesting direction of this, is actually finding like a singular location and a hub for this in an ongoing way that is, it's a consistent place for it.
Well, it's just exciting, the partnerships that you're developing to, by having these trades trainings that are also associated with other organizations. That's great.
Yeah. And NYSERDA does a great job of this also at the state level, obviously through funding those types of things, but also through connecting, organizations and places to help put these on.
Sweet. Yeah. I mean, specifically for, to your new position as executive director, how are you hoping to specifically reach out to some of these more organizations that haven't really been involved in the high performance or passive house community?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about this a lot in the community, is like our language and verbiage when we talk about this, and what is the language that you use to get people to care or to be interested and curious. So I think that's important to talk about, is what is the language we use, and then also who are we approaching with that language and targeting the right language to the right audience. I think this year we are really focusing on that expansion beyond our comfortable bubble that I was talking about, that knowledge bubble and the Passive House bubble of experience or awareness, and targeting industry adjacent partnerships while speaking their language. So affordable housing agencies like New York City HPD and New York State HCR that I mentioned know about Passive House, but we don't have any formal partnerships with them for, training, whether it's their in-house people or providing partnered, events and trainings. That's at the city and state level. Organizations like NYSAFA, the New York State Affordable Financing and Housing, I think is the acronym, and other housing providers like Riseborough and other developers that provide affordable senior supportive housing, as well as on the planning side, right? The Department of City Planning, they just went through zoning reform. So how can we partner with them to help educate and enable folks while speaking their language, right? So what is the language that affordable housing providers care about? And it could be tenant stability, it could be operating budgets, it could be health outcomes and compliance risk and insurance premiums. And, Passive House doesn't have to be mentioned at all, but all of those things are very related. Similarly, working with city government now is going to be really exciting. I mean, the mayor has already put together such a strong task force to tackle, through the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, for example, and talking about emergency management and resiliency and all the things I just mentioned on the, housing provider side, tenant stability and affordability and equity. Same thing through the Department of Buildings, right? The NYCDOB Energy Code and Sustainability Units. They are very busy right now enforcing Local 97 and going to be very busy enforcing the new energy code. So how do we talk to them about compliance pathways and easing, bridging that gap? Again, we don't have to mention Passive House. We can mention resiliency. We can mention comfort. We can mention aging in place. We can mention, affordable operations and maintenance. And, I mentioned already the workforce training and the partnerships with unions. So approaching them with the language of how do you get it built? What is the easiest, most cost-effective way to comply with XYZ? At the real estate kind of management and property management side of things through REBNY and BOMA and other real estate agency and organizations like that, it's about, how do you fill leases and how do you market better, healthier buildings and all the same things from the housing perspective of tenant stability and those good things. So passive house doesn't have to be the leading language, and I think that's going to be a major shift this year in what we're like positioned and kind of rebranded for.
I think that's, as someone who's occasionally worked with REBNY, never mention passive house and always talk about money. Yeah. Everything has to be framed as it will save you money no matter what it is, and they'll be receptive. Anything else, they kind of, that's
right.
I've not had. I'll stop talking. I'll just stop talking about that.
Well, no, you hit it on the head there with the, how our focus is economics. How do we make this work? How do you make it pencil? And lead with that, and maybe even end with that, because it's all related in a very stealth way.
Right. A very critical aspect of getting a project actually done. And I want to bring this back a little bit to your own. This is not the only, as you mentioned, not the only job that you're taking on now. You recently branched out. I just want to hear a little bit more about what kind of projects you're working on, because it's huge. What you were just talking about, all the goals for 2026 for New York Passive House. What kind of projects are you working on also?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And I guess,
and also, what's the name of your consulting business?
ZAZNRG, so ZAZNRG, and you can go online and check out the website zaznrg.com. There's a bit of the origin story of the name and more of an explanation, which I won't take up too much of our time explaining. But I personally am aligning a lot more with what we just spoke about in terms of broadening building science and sustainability and building energy to marry the people and human aspect of building energy. I guess the big idea and kind of two taglines that I work within is less carbon, more comfort, right? So centering comfort and reducing carbon at the same time, but also bridging the human aspect of buildings, because buildings only perform as well as people behave. And getting to that side of building operation, now building on, over 12 years of working primarily on the design and construction side of buildings, helping folks, developers, property managers bridge that critical 1 to 2 years of commissioning, kind of post-construction, where there's a lot of drift in the building, and there's a lot of adjusting to how building operators from a facility perspective, but also tenants from, resident perspective, are operating within the building and understanding how to use it optimally. That paired with more public education, kind of getting back to my roots of the boots on the ground, doing like library and community board, educational seminars on energy savings tips for wherever you live, however you live, sharing more of that lived experience kind of public education rather than solely technical building science geeky stuff geared to our bubble of an industry. And then also the types of projects I'm taking on are very much in line with what I've been doing in the past: passive house certification, consulting, energy modeling, on-site verification, air barrier consulting, decarbonization planning, both on the retrofit side and on the new construction side. And in some ways also returning back to smaller scale. In my most recent professional history, I've been working at very large scale multifamily high-rise and, kind of big scale projects. And I'm coming back to, in many ways, smaller scale, whether single family or small multifamily on the certification implementation side. But then on the building operation, education and training side, from an operations and maintenance perspective, I'm hoping to do a lot more building facilities and tenant engagement around how, you got the keys to your passive house now. How do you drive it?
Nice. And just like regionally, are you going to be focused more in the city and like kind of downstate, or are you going to be all over New York?
That's a great question. It depends on the scope of work. If it's on site, somewhat a little bit more limited to proximity just from a cost and carbon perspective. But otherwise, if it's remote work, it's pretty open, geographically.
Cool.
Great. Well, commissioning is such a critical piece that's often overlooked. So congratulations on that focus. I think it's sorely needed.
Thanks. Yeah, agreed. We've learned a heck of a lot in the last, really decade of like concentrated passive house work, and now, functioning passive house buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So we're following the data in that perspective and learning as we go, but importantly, adjusting quickly, right? So as soon as we learn, how do we implement and adjust?
Well, it's been really great talking with you. I really appreciate your time, and what an exciting 2026 is clearly in store for you.
Yes, yeah, it is really exciting. And like I mentioned before, I'm really grateful to be able to stay connected and involved with all the passive house and non-passive house movement and organizations through the work of Passive House Accelerator, through Reimagine Buildings Collective. And so I want to say thank you back to you guys both, specifically in your work of, helping to spread that knowledge, helping to bring together folks and open that knowledge sharing. It's incredibly powerful, and I think it speaks to the accelerated growth that we've had in the space for the last couple of years.
Yeah, it has been a wild ride watching this go from like nobody's ever heard of it to fairly common now. It's like, it's surprising. Yeah. But I guess I want to end with one question about a specific project. Like what's like a project that you're just super excited about in New York, either on the horizon, under construction, or already built? Like, what do you think is just emblematic of how like the passive house standard is really more versatile than people appreciate, and just like what to look forward to with green building in the coming years?
Yeah, there are many specific projects that come to mind, and just a few off the top of my head. I think on the retrofit side, we're now seeing an exciting scale and acceleration there. New York University Rubin Hall as an example of, just a large scale retrofit pursuing the ENERFIT standard, as well as the Three Arts building that is, in design and soon to be retrofit. Those are two, I think, emblematic examples on the retrofit side, as well as the firehouse, the Ingui architecture firehouse that I think many people have looked to as an example for some time now. More, I guess, personally and selfishly in my world, I'm working on a project called Highbridge with Magnuson Architecture and Planning. Mega is the contractor, and it's just large scale, 32 floors of over 400 units of passive house affordable housing that includes both transitory and permanent housing and supportive services for people that either have substance abuse issues and need support or have previously been houseless. And that project it sticks out like a sore thumb contextually where it's being built in a way, I think, hopefully in a good way, that signals kind of what's ahead, the opportunity and the importance of providing this kind of housing. And then again, just speaking to the scale of like, we are now in that high-rise skyscraper era of passive house. We have Sendero Verde, which is just a huge development of hundreds and hundreds of housing units, very tall building. And of course, the competition of tallest passive house in the world. We now have that Flatbush biggest building, 60 plus stories that is being constructed. So again, that healthy competition of being the first and tallest and biggest and best and whatever is working. And we love in the industry to be able to have those projects to look to and point to and learn from.
Yeah.
Well, there's a great note, honestly. That's really exciting.
Yeah. So we'll see. When someone breaks the 100-story ceiling of Passive House, we'll have to figure out what to talk about next.
Well, then they'll be like, well, it's the tallest that's FIA standard, so someone will have to do the tallest PHI, and then someone will have to do the
Right.
mass timber, and then so
exactly. Yeah, I was joking with my Highbridge Mega team, the contractor side, because I was telling them, maybe for a few months you will be the tallest FIAS building in the city, but you can find other, there's 5 subcellars. The lot is sloping and there's like a lot of below grade. So you could be the biggest combination of below grade and above grade stories. Passive House for some time. You'll find a way.
And that one will honestly, that will probably have the best view of any Passive House I've like written. I interviewed Sarah about that. I think, Jesus, I may have still lived in New York at the time that I was writing about that.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? It speaks to the commitment and length of time that it takes to plan and develop and make these projects a reality. So yeah, it's like as long as we've been talking about it, it's been that kind of important project for so many people that are involved with it. And I agree with you, in terms of best view. I lived across the river on the Washington Heights side of that for a while, and Highbridge is just an incredible like piece of history and bridge that exists in our boroughs. So yeah, it is a very kind of, it stands out in a very historically, and I don't know the word for it, but it's
iconic project. We'll just call it that.
Yeah.
And that was Carmel Pratt, who is the new Executive Director of New York Passive House, as well as being the founder and principal of her own very comprehensive consultancy practice. Great conversation. Thank you, Mary and Jay. Let's go to you first, Mary. What were the highlights from that chat?
Well, there were so many of them, but her rundown of the policies that have encouraged the growth of Passive House in New York was succinct and comprehensive all at once. So I thought that was really great.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive background, and I always enjoy hearing those reminders of where those organizations have come from and some of the early resistance, I guess, and trying to convince people from those early days of fairly small numbers to where things are today. It's great to acknowledge all that work that's gone on. Yeah. Jay, what was your highlight?
Well, I like that the theme is going to be enablement, and that there was a specific focus on kind of going to trade schools and unions and building up just the trades and bringing them on board. Because I feel like that, I would say within the last 2 years, and not as much New York, but perhaps other jurisdictions, a lot of folks have kind of complained that there needs to be more upskilling of the people who are actually on the ground building these high performance buildings. And yeah, I'm really appreciative that Carmel is kind of leading the charge to bring more on board.
Yeah. Really great to focus on that. At least one area that I hope won't be totally overtaken by AI right now is all the people that are actually doing stuff with their hands, doing stuff on the ground, at least for the short term anyway. But a really important part of the whole delivery process and the whole industry is to have the people who are actually putting buildings together on that journey as well. And as similar to with the developers, and I liked what Carmel mentioned about finding the right language. And Jay, your comment about, it's all about the money.
Yeah.
And how to talk about Passive House without talking about Passive House, which is something that you've talked about before.
Yeah, and I wish I could have taken that back, but a little bit. But you do have to talk about money, unfortunately. These things aren't just, pop out of the air. So as much as
I wouldn't take it back. I think it's absolutely it's true. And a lot of us are hesitant to go down that path. But when you're talking to developers and they're literally the people holding the purse strings and making things either work or not work in terms of a project going ahead, then it's kind of doing a sales pitch, and we've got to kind of get better at doing that, I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
And Zach, you had a chance to listen. What was your highlight?
Well, it's really exciting to see the moves that Carmel is making in her career and the impact that she's making on the world via that. And I've been thinking a lot about the theme of taking leaps, something I've been kind of speaking about, and this sense that we're in a time where incremental change is too slow, and we need to be taking leaps into the clean energy transition, into better buildings. And so that means leaps in our own work. And at the time that Carmel was already a leader at Bright Power before starting her own firm and becoming the executive director of New York Passive House, she was what I thought was kind of inspiring, and I think a lesson that others can glean from her story. And by the way, this is something that we're also exploring within the Reimagine Buildings Collective. The monthly theme this month is the next step. So it's like identifying one's next step in one's work and then supporting one another to make that happen. So that's another piece of context here. But as she was a leader at Bright Power, and before this move that she's been making, she was volunteering and doing that out on the street with the Icebox Challenge, communicating about Passive House and helping make that kind of public science experiment real in Manhattan, and then was volunteering on the board of New York Passive House, and that engagement helped lay the foundation for that leap that she's been able to make now into becoming the executive director of the organization. And that's a pattern I think that people can emulate in their own work, especially if you're interested in doing nonprofit advocacy work. That the kind of mantra or the first step of getting involved and participating and volunteering and contributing can be so powerful. And I think it's worked really well for Carmel, and also really fortunate for New York Passive House. They're very lucky to have her.
Definitely. Yep. Yeah, obviously a lot of work volunteering, and it was good to hear that acknowledgement of lots of other names at the start as well, of those people that sort of got together and got things moving, quite likely, I imagine, over a drink and a conversation. and to see where things have come to is quite impressive. I guess for me, there was a bit of a theme towards the end there about people, and I really like that tagline of more comfort and less carbon, and really focusing on people, but also acknowledging that how well a building performs is as much up to how people behave as much as the design and construction of the building, as well as the commissioning, and not just kind of handing over a building and saying, oh, well, here you go for it. I hope your power bills are low. But you're looking at that continual operation, making sure all the systems are working properly, and then continuing to do that for, I think she said, a couple of years, a number of years into the building's life, which I think is really important, combined with public education or building user education, which I think is often left out, because we build these relatively complex machines and then just assume that people are going to know how to operate them. So some really exciting stuff there, and a great look into where Carmel's focus is now, and looking into the future as well. I felt very positive listening to that. So thank you very much, Mary and Jade. Another great conversation. And of course, thanks to Carmel and the team and all her fantastic work over the years. It was really good to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. Great to chat with her.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what have we got coming up, Zach, over at the Accelerator and at Reimagine?
Yeah, so this episode will go live on Tuesday, January 13th, and that is the day when we have Carmel Pratt at the Reimagine Buildings Collective. She's going to be doing a Reimagine special interview with Michael Ingui. So if you are curious about the collective, please check it out, and we'd love to have you join us. And then on Wednesday, January 14th, we're joined by James Peterson, who was just on the podcast, and he's going to be doing a PHA Live 101 session called Electrification of Domestic Hot Water in Multifamily Buildings. And then he'll be following up that appearance on the Accelerator with an appearance within the collective, doing a Ask Me Anything Friday session to dive deeper into people's challenges and questions around domestic hot water delivery. And I think that's probably good. We have a full roster of events. Passive House Accelerator Live is up and running and launched for the 2026 season. So please join us on Wednesdays at noon and connect with us.
And we should also mention Jay's been very busy pumping out lots of fantastic articles. So even if you can't get to some of those events, you've done some pretty deep dives, Jay, recently on the Accelerator website, getting into health and all sorts of some topics. So there's some pretty good reading there.
Yeah, I would recommend the most recent one that came out on the 9th. Pretty proud of that one. Apologies to those who don't have a medical background. I didn't want to presume any previous knowledge, so some of it might seem a little basic to folks, but I figured it was better to kind of over-explain some things rather than under-explain.
Well, I don't really know what allostasis and allostatic load is myself, so I'm going to go and check that out and school up.
Once it clicks and you see it, you're like, oh, holy crap, this makes so much. This in part kind of explains why, say, someone with diabetes, type 2 diabetes might be more susceptible to long COVID or depression. And all these things are kind of interrelated with it's a way of understanding how stress on the body kind of interacts with your immune system and, leads to psychiatric and neurological symptoms. So it's awesome. Really pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if that sounds all intriguing, definitely encourage people to go and check that out. There's a really good information, and it's another really great angle as well. Whenever we're having conversations about Passive House to different people, and just another great reason to design and build buildings better. Thank you very much, Mary, James, and Jay Fox, and also again to Carmel for that great conversation this week. Thank you, Zach, and the rest of the team, and we'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.